Welcome back to the channel. Imagine waking up one winter morning in Utah to find your neighbor's home eerily quiet, the car still in the driveway, lights off, and no one answering the door. That was how the story of Susan Powell began, a mother of two, a wife, and a woman who seemed to have simply vanished overnight. On the morning of December 7, 2009, Susan was gone. Her wallet and phone sat untouched. Her husband, Josh Powell, told police he had taken their two young boys camping in the middle of the freezing desert at midnight. To most people, that story never made sense. But it was the start of a mystery that would unfold into one of the most haunting family tragedies in American true crime history. Susan had been living what many thought was an ordinary suburban life. But behind closed doors, things were far from peaceful. Friends later recalled moments of fear and quiet distress, signs that Susan was trapped in a marriage filled with control and tension. In her personal journals, she hinted at wanting to start over to escape. And then, just like that, she was gone. When police entered the Powell home, they found small but chilling clues, traces of Susan's blood near a freshly cleaned couch, a fan blowing on wet carpet, and no sign of struggle. Josh's calm explanations only deepened suspicion. He seemed more concerned about being accused than about finding his wife. Days turned into weeks, and while volunteers searched the Utah desert, Josh maintained his innocence, yet refused to help investigators. Over the next few years, the case twisted in ways no one could have imagined. Josh lost custody of his sons after disturbing discoveries about his father's behavior and the family's obsession with Susan's image. Then, in 2012, during what was supposed to be a supervised visit, Josh locked the door, ignited a fire, and took his own life, along with his children's. The explosion ended 3 lives, but not the questions that have haunted this case ever since. Today, more than 15 years later, Susan's body has never been found. Police believe Josh killed her and that his brother, Michael, helped hide the evidence before taking his own life as well. Yet with no confession, no physical remains, and no final piece of proof, the case remains open, half truth, half silence. The story of Susan Powell is not just about disappearance. It is about the hidden violence that can grow inside an ordinary home, about the systems that failed to protect her and her sons, and about the people still searching for a trace of her somewhere in the Utah wilderness. Even now, her family says they won't stop looking, not until the desert finally gives up its secret. The night Susan Powell disappeared, nothing about her husband's version of events made sense. Josh Powell told investigators that on December 6, 2009, he had decided without warning to take their 2 little boys camping at midnight in sub-freezing temperatures. They supposedly drove out to the west desert of Utah, built a fire, and returned home the next morning. When police arrived later that day, Susan was nowhere to be found. Inside the house, detectives immediately noticed things that did not add up. There were fans blowing on damp carpet, a freshly cleaned sofa, and a faint metallic smell that would later be confirmed as traces of Susan's blood. Her purse, wallet, and identification were still inside the home. Her cell phone was found in Josh's minivan, its SIM card removed. Nothing about the scene suggested that Susan had left voluntarily. It looked like someone had tried to erase what had happened. When questioned, Josh appeared oddly detached. He did not ask where Susan was or if she would be found. Instead, he focused on defending his camping trip and insisting that she must have run away or been kidnapped. His story changed slightly each time he told it, but his calm tone never did. Investigators, and even friends, felt a growing unease. His behavior was almost rehearsed, as if he were playing a role. As the hours passed, police began to realize they were not looking for a missing person who might come home. They were looking for evidence of a crime that had already happened. The temperature that night had dropped below freezing. No mother would willingly take her young children camping at such an hour. Josh's explanation, on its face, was impossible. In the following days, detectives searched the Powell family minivan and the desert where Josh claimed to have gone camping. No sign of Susan. But the sand told its own quiet story tracks that did not match his description. No campfire remains where he said they would been. Every clue pointed back to the same place, their home in West Valley City. Behind the strange details of that night lay a pattern that investigators would later recognize: isolation, control, and fear, hallmarks of an abusive relationship. For friends and relatives who had long sensed something was wrong, Susan's disappearance did not just shock them. It confirmed their worst suspicions. That December night, the official search began. But in many ways, the truth had already been buried under layers of lies, cold desert sand, and a man's attempt to rewrite what happened inside that quiet Utah home. From the very beginning, Josh Powell's actions drew suspicion. When Susan's friends and coworkers realized she had not shown up for work, they called the police. Officers arrived to find the house locked and dark. Only when they broke in did they discover the odd scene: the damp carpets, the missing wife, and two small boys who could barely explain where their mother had gone. Josh returned home later that afternoon, calm and collected. While detectives were combing through his living room, he casually mentioned that he would been camping with his sons. Not worried, not panicked, just strangely distant. That attitude would define him throughout the investigation. When questioned by police, Josh refused to take a polygraph test. He avoided media interviews and declined to join community searches for Susan. Investigators found traces of her blood near the living room couch and on the floor. They also discovered that Josh had recently taken out life insurance policies worth over $1 million. Even more unsettling were the details uncovered from Susan's own words. She had written a will months earlier, saying, "If I die, it may not be an accident." Those lines, hidden in her private notes, would later echo in every headline and every documentary about the case. Josh's coldness turned to defiance. He lawyered up quickly, refused to let police re-interview the children, and soon packed up the family's belongings to move out of state. Meanwhile, volunteers searched snowy fields, deserts, and mine shafts, hoping to find any sign of Susan. Nothing ever surfaced. It became painfully clear to everyone the story Josh told could not be true. The midnight camping trip, the spotless living room, the missing SIM card, the smell of bleach, each piece fit a pattern no one could ignore. What began as a missing person case had become something darker, a story of control, denial, and the quiet destruction of a family behind closed doors. From that point on, Josh was no longer just Susan's husband. He was the center of an investigation that would haunt Utah for years, and his every move, from his silence to his sudden relocations, would make one question not if he was involved, but how deeply. Before Susan disappeared, the signs were already there, subtle to outsiders, painfully obvious to those close to her. Friends recalled moments when she looked tired, but tried to smile it away. Her journal told more. Notes about financial pressure, about feeling trapped, and about a marriage that had become a careful performance rather than a partnership. Josh Powell was not violent in the way people imagined danger. His control was quieter, built through money, isolation, and constant monitoring. He controlled the family finances, limited Susan's independence, and dismissed her opinions in public. She was a devoted mother trying to hold the family together, but her letters showed fear that her husband might hurt her if she ever left. At church, she appeared composed, a loving wife and mother of 2 small boys, Charlie and Braden. But behind that calm exterior, she was saving what little she could and documenting her life just in case. Those words, found later by her family, read like a message to the future, a record for when she might not be there to speak. Family gatherings revealed more cracks. Susan's family described Josh as withdrawn, even cold, while Josh's own father, Steve Powell, displayed a disturbing obsession with Susan, secretly recording and photographing her. Susan knew it and confided to friends that the entire family dynamic made her uncomfortable. The boundaries in that house were blurry, and she was the only one trying to hold them in place. The power imbalance only deepened when the economy worsened. Josh's spending habits spiraled, the family faced debt, and tension grew. Susan's friends later said she talked about getting a divorce, but she worried what Josh might do if she filed. She once told a coworker, "He will ruin me. He will take the boys." Those fears now feel like prophecy. When Susan vanished, everything she had written and said suddenly became evidence. Her words were no longer about marital frustration. They were warnings. What police would later uncover in those journals painted a portrait of a woman quietly preparing for the unthinkable, hoping her story would still be heard if she could not tell it herself. Inside that modest Utah home, love, fear, and control lived side by side. And when Susan disappeared, that imbalance collapsed completely, revealing what she had feared all along, that the danger was not outside the family. It was inside it. When the search for Susan Powell began, no one imagined it would stretch for more than a decade. Police, volunteers, and her family combed through the Utah desert, mountains, and abandoned mines, believing that somewhere out there, the earth was holding her story. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into years, the silence grew heavier. At first, investigators followed Josh's own claim, his midnight camping trip to the West Desert. Crews scoured that barren stretch of land, where temperatures dropped below freezing at night and the wind erased footprints by morning. They found no trace of Susan. Not her clothing, not her jewelry, not a single piece of evidence strong enough to say where she might have gone. Leads came and went. Tips from across the country poured in sightings, confessions, rumors, but every one of them fell apart under investigation. The longer it went on, the clearer it became. If Josh had hidden her, he had done it with meticulous planning. Searchers began exploring old mine shafts, sinkholes, and abandoned wells, any place deep enough to keep a secret. Some were so dangerous that rescue teams risked their lives just to look. The hope was always the same, that finding her could give her family peace, that maybe she had not been lost forever, but nothing surfaced. Without a body, the case sat in a cruel limbo. The police could not declare her dead, the courts could not prosecute, and her loved ones could not fully grieve. Each anniversary brought the same heartbreak, candlelight vigils, empty answers, and the quiet question that no one could escape. Where is Susan? For the public, the disappearance became a haunting symbol of how people can vanish, even in the middle of an ordinary neighborhood. For her family, it was worse, a reminder that the truth might be buried somewhere they could never reach. Over the years, every rumor of bones discovered in the desert reignited fragile hope, but each time DNA tests ruled them out. The desert kept its silence. The mountains offered nothing. And yet, her parents and friends never stopped searching, never stopped believing that one day someone would stumble upon the last piece of her story. 15 years later, that hope is the only thing that remains. Susan Powell is still missing, her resting place still unknown, a mother's presence erased, but her absence impossible to forget. By early 2012, the investigation into Susan's disappearance had slowed, but the shadow over Josh Powell's life had not. He had lost custody of his two sons, Charlie and Braden, after disturbing reports about his behavior and the toxic atmosphere in his family home. Social workers described him as unstable and manipulative. His father, Steve Powell, had been arrested for voyeurism and child pornography, deepening the image of a deeply broken family. Still, Josh fought to regain visitation rights. The court allowed supervised visits at his rented home in Graham, Washington. The arrangement was meant to be safe, every meeting closely monitored, every door kept open. But on February 5, 2012, that illusion of safety shattered. When the boys arrived that Sunday morning, they ran ahead of the social worker toward the house, excited to see their father. Josh ushered them inside, then locked the door before she could follow. Seconds later, she smelled gasoline. Moments after she dialed 911, the house exploded in flames. The blast was deliberate, fueled by accelerants placed around the home. Inside, firefighters found the bodies of Josh, Charlie, and Braden. All three had died instantly. The fire was not just a suicide, it was an execution. Josh had struck his sons with a hatchet before igniting the explosion, ensuring no one would survive. In that single act, Josh ended any chance of uncovering the full truth of what happened to Susan. For investigators, it was confirmation of guilt they could no longer prove in court. For the Powell and Cox families, it was an agony beyond words. The children had been the last living connection to Susan, the last light in a case filled with darkness. The deaths of Charlie and Braden turned public anger toward the system meant to protect them. How, people asked, could a man under suspicion for his wife's disappearance, under psychiatric scrutiny, and living under court supervision, still have access to his children? What happened that morning was not just the end of a Tarajit family. It was a failure of safeguards, a collapse of trust in the institutions that were supposed to see danger coming. The house burned to ash, but the questions did not. For many, that explosion felt like Josh's final message, that he would rather destroy everything than be held accountable. In the ruins of that home, the truth about Susan's fate became even more unreachable. All that remained were photographs, police files, and the haunting certainty that the man who could have told the world what happened chose instead to silence it forever. After Josh Powell's death, investigators turned their attention to his younger brother, Michael Powell, a man who had kept his distance from the chaos but was never entirely out of its shadow. Michael lived in Minnesota, far from Utah, but his actions and movements began to draw scrutiny once police reviewed his financial and digital records. What they found was unsettling. Just days after Susan's disappearance, Michael had sold his car for scrap in a junkyard near Pendleton, Oregon, hundreds of miles from where he lived. The car sat in storage for years before police finally recovered it and sent it for forensic testing. Cadaver dogs alerted to the scent of human decomposition in the trunk, though there was not enough physical evidence left to confirm anything conclusively. Still, it was the first solid indication that Susan's body might have been moved with his help. Michael had also been unusually defensive whenever asked about Susan. He publicly supported Josh, repeating that his brother was innocent, but in private, his tone was colder, more evasive. Investigators pieced together a pattern: frequent communication between the brothers after Susan vanished, odd money transfers, and online searches for remote desert and mine locations. Detectives began to believe that Michael might have helped dispose of Susan's remains, possibly in one of Utah's countless abandoned mines. It would have explained the precision and permanence of her disappearance, the way her trail simply stopped. By 2013, as pressure from investigators increased, Michael's life unraveled. He withdrew from family and work, showing signs of anxiety and paranoia. In February of that year, he parked his car near his apartment complex's parking garage in Minneapolis, climbed to the roof, and jumped to his death. He left no note. His suicide was another loss that offered no answers, only confirmation that the truth was buried deeper than ever. The Powell family's silence became total. Both brothers gone, their father facing charges, and Susan still missing. For detectives, Michael's death closed another door in a case already sealed by tragedy. But for Susan's family, it deepened the belief that he knew exactly where she was and chose to take that secret with him. In the end, Michael Powell became the ghost of the investigation, a man who said little, left few traces, but whose quiet movements might hold the missing link between a vanished woman and the desert that still keeps her hidden. By 2013, the official investigation into Susan Powell's disappearance had exhausted nearly every lead. Detectives had tracked credit cards, phone records, emails, and even satellite images, but nothing ever led to Susan herself. After years of combing deserts, searching mine shafts, and interviewing every possible witness, the West Valley City Police Department finally made their position public. They believed Josh and Michael Powell were responsible for Susan's disappearance and presumed death. It was not a declaration made lightly. Investigators had built a mountain of circumstantial evidence, blood traces, financial documents, inconsistencies in Josh's statements, and digital records showing his obsessive attempts to control and isolate Susan. Combined, it painted a clear but frustrating picture, enough to believe she would have been murdered, but not enough to prove it in court. The police held a press conference that year, summarizing what had become one of Utah's most tragic cold cases. They revealed that the family's computer hard drives contained disturbing material, digital fantasies about control and revenge, private writings that echoed the darkness inside that home. They confirmed that Josh had planned the 2012 explosion meticulously, buying fuel, setting traps, and emailing a last-minute goodbye to his attorney. Still, even with everything they knew, they could not close the case. Without a body or direct evidence, prosecutors had no way to pursue formal murder charges. Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, listened as police explained that the case was technically still open, but effectively frozen, every answer depending on evidence that might never surface. That announcement marked a turning point. The story shifted from "Who killed Susan Powell?" to "Will she ever be found?" The police moved the case to inactive status, meaning it would remain open but dormant until new information appeared. For Susan's family, the statement was both validation and heartbreak. They had long believed Josh was responsible, but hearing it from the authorities made it final in a different way. There would be no courtroom, no cross-examination, no moment where Josh would have to face what he had done. It was justice by acknowledgement, not by verdict. Law enforcement had seen enough to know the truth, but not enough to prove it. And in that gap between belief and proof, Susan's story remained suspended, still waiting for the one piece of evidence that could finally turn certainty into closure. Even after the 2013 police declaration, the search for Susan Powell never truly stopped. Officially, the case sat in inactive status, but detectives continued to follow new tips whenever they surfaced, each one a flicker of hope in a story that refused to fade. In the years that followed, search teams revisited Utah's remote landscapes, especially the Topaz Mountain area, and stretches of desert Josh was known to visit. Private volunteers joined law enforcement in combing through abandoned mine shafts, thousands of them scattered across the state. Every search carried the same mix of hope and dread that this time they might finally find her. In 2019, a search near Ely, Nevada, was prompted by a tip that human remains had been found in a mine shaft. The bones were tested, but did not match Susan's DNA. In 2022, another lead took investigators to a different desert site, again with no results. The land seemed to swallow every trace of her. Technology also evolved. Forensic teams reviewed Josh and Michael's old digital devices using newer recovery tools, searching for deleted GPS data, messages, or photos that might reveal a burial location. Some fragments were recovered, but nothing conclusive enough to pinpoint where Susan might be. Meanwhile, the public's fascination with the case persisted. Online communities kept mapping out theories, comparing satellite imagery, and tracking police updates. The case became a kind of collective obsession, an open wound for Utah, and a haunting lesson about how easily someone can vanish, even in the modern world. For Susan's parents, every rumor, every headline, and every discovery of unidentified remains somewhere in the West brought the same ache of hope. They continued organizing searches and memorial events, vowing never to stop looking. "We just want to bring her home," they said again and again, a phrase that became a kind of prayer. In truth, the investigation now moves on a slower rhythm. Decades-old tips are revisited only if credible, and new ones are rare. But the file remains open, sitting in a drawer inside the West Valley City Police Department, a case still waiting for a voice that can no longer speak. 15 years later, what remains is persistence. The belief that someday, someone walking through the Utah wilderness might stumble upon what the police have sought for so long. Until then, Susan Powell's name stays on the active missing person registry, a symbol of how justice sometimes waits longer than anyone should have to. From the beginning, the disappearance of Susan Powell gripped the public in a way few cases ever do. She was not a stranger from a headline. She was a young mother with a warm smile, 2 little boys, and a life that looked like so many others. Her story hit close to home because it could have been anyone's neighbor, anyone's friend. News outlets covered every development: the midnight camping trip, the blood evidence, the father-in-law's obsession, the tragic explosion that killed Josh and the children. Over time, the case evolved from a missing person mystery into a national study of control, domestic violence, and institutional failure. Documentaries, podcasts, and long-form features kept Susan's name alive. Shows like Dateline, NBC, and 20 for 20 revisited the case repeatedly, each time uncovering new interviews, police audio, or digital records that painted a clearer picture of what had happened behind closed doors. The 2024-20 per 20 special marked the 15th anniversary of her disappearance, reuniting investigators, family members, and journalists who had followed the case since day one. It was not about breaking news anymore. It was about remembering, about making sure she did not disappear twice. Social media amplified her story in ways that earlier cases never could. Online communities on Reddit, Facebook, and YouTube analyzed police reports, tracked digital timelines, and even visited the sites connected to Josh's suspicious trips. Thousands of users pieced together theories, debating where her remains might be or how law enforcement might have missed key evidence. The discussion became a kind of digital vigil, a constant hum of attention that refused to die out. Is Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, learned to navigate this strange new world of public grief. They gave interviews, attended true crime conventions, and collaborated with advocacy groups on domestic violence awareness campaigns. "If we can't bring Susan home," Chuck once said, "we can at least make sure other families do not live what we did." The media, for all its flaws, gave Susan's story longevity. It kept pressure on the system, inspired policy conversations, and turned her tragedy into a cautionary tale about how signs of control and abuse can hide behind normal smiles and suburban walls. Even now, 15 years later, the story resurfaces every few months, an article here, a documentary there, each reminding the world that justice delayed is not the same as justice denied. In that persistence, in that collective memory, Susan Powell remains visible, and in a way, that visibility has become her voice, the only one left to tell the story she never got to finish. After the deaths of Josh Powell and his sons, the tragedy became more than a criminal mystery. It turned into a mirror, reflecting how deeply the system had failed. The story was not just about one man's violence, but about all the missed chances to stop it. When Josh was granted supervised visitation, there had already been clear warning signs: a mother missing under suspicious circumstances, a father who refused full cooperation with police, and psychological reports that labeled him controlling and manipulative. Yet the court allowed him limited access to his children, trusting that supervision was enough. It was not. That trust cost 2 young lives. The aftermath sparked public outrage. How could a man under such scrutiny be left alone with the very children he would threaten to use as leverage? How had the legal system underestimated the danger he posed not only to others, but to himself? Investigations into the handling of the case revealed what many advocates had long argued. Domestic violence is often misunderstood as a matter of anger or conflict, when in truth it is about power, control, and fear. Susan's case illustrated that perfectly. The danger was not in sudden explosions of rage. It was in years of quiet domination, the kind of abuse that leaves no bruises, but isolates a person completely. Child welfare agencies faced the same scrutiny. The decision to allow Josh visitation came after pressure from legal procedures that prioritized parental rights over safety concerns. In hindsight, those decisions looked devastatingly naive. In the years since, Utah and Washington have both reviewed and refined their visitation and custody guidelines in cases involving domestic violence and unresolved disappearances. Beyond policy, Susan's story reshaped conversations nationwide. Her parents became advocates, pushing for awareness of how systems handle cases where one parent is a suspect and the other is missing. They spoke before lawmakers, appeared in documentaries, and met with domestic violence organizations to turn grief into prevention. Every failure in the Powell case now serves as a lesson. Police, social workers, and family courts use her story in training sessions, not as a ghost story, but as a warning that danger often looks ordinary until it is too late. In the end, the system learned too slowly, at the cost of 3 innocent lives. But the scrutiny that followed ensured one thing: that Susan Powell's story would not just echo as a tragedy, but stand as evidence of what must never be allowed to happen again. As of 2025, the disappearance of Susan Powell remains one of America's most haunting unresolved cases. 15 years have passed since that winter morning when she vanished, leaving behind a house of secrets and a family forever broken. Despite endless searching, countless interviews, and renewed public attention, her body has never been found, and no one has ever been charged with her murder. For investigators, the case sits in a strange, suspended state, neither closed nor forgotten. West Valley City, police still list her as a missing person. They occasionally re-examine old evidence, using modern technology, such as advanced DNA recovery and satellite imaging. But so far, nothing has led them to Susan's final resting place. Every so often, a new lead surfaces: bones found in the desert, rumors of confessions, old maps reanalyzed, but hope fades as each one ends the same way: not Susan. Her parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, continue to lead quiet campaigns to keep her name alive. They have turned grief into purpose, advocating for stronger laws to protect victims of domestic violence and children caught in unstable family situations. They visit schools, speak at conferences, and remind people that Susan was not a headline. She was a daughter, a mother, a friend. Their mission is no longer just about finding her. It is about preventing others from vanishing the same way. Public fascination remains steady. Documentaries, podcasts, and anniversary specials still revisit her story. Each generation of viewers finding the same disbelief in the contradictions: how a woman could disappear from her own home, how her husband could walk free, and how the truth could remain buried despite everything we know. For Utah, the case is no longer just a tragedy. It is a cautionary landmark, a story that reshaped how domestic abuse and missing person cases are handled. The name Susan Powell has become shorthand for a systemic warning that red flags ignored can turn into funerals unspoken. Yet even in the midst of heartbreak, a quiet resilience endures. Each year, at candlelight vigils, her family and supporters gather to say the same thing: they will not give up. Somewhere in the mountains, deserts, or endless stretch of earth, they believe the answer still waits. And so the story continues, not as a mystery for entertainment, but as a wound that still asks to be healed. Until the day Susan Powell is found, her case will remain open, her memory unburied, and her name a symbol of both sorrow and strength. When we look back at the disappearance of Susan Powell, we are not just revisiting a mystery. We are tracing the slow unraveling of a family and the limits of a justice system that could not stop what it saw coming. Her story holds all the contrasts of real tragedy: love and fear, silence and noise, hope and loss. It reminds us how danger can live quietly inside ordinary walls, and how control can look like calm until it turns deadly. 15 years later, Susan's face still appears in news archives and on missing person registries. Her parents still speak her name with the same steady conviction they had on day one. The world has changed around them, but the question remains exactly the same: where is she? Maybe one day, that answer will surface somewhere in the stillness of the Utah desert, or in the memories of someone who finally decides to speak. Until then, her story stands as both a warning and a promise that truth, no matter how deeply buried, is never entirely gone. Thank you for joining me in revisiting this difficult story. If you want to honor Susan's memory, the best way is simple. Pay attention to the quiet signs around you, to the people who seem trapped in silence. Sometimes, noticing is the first step towards saving someone who can still be found. Stay safe, take care of each other, and I will see you in the next story.